New adventures await in the Sky Realm. Vast lands teeming with life, waiting to be explored by adventurers brave enough to heed the call. On a quest to search for the legendary island of the Astros, Estalusia, you and your crew continue the journey across the skies, reaching the Zega Grande Skydome. Your arrival, however, was not without its setbacks, as sinister forces are on the hunt for your team for reasons unknown. With enemies lurking in the shadows and terrible events unfolding throughout Zega Grande, you are entrusted with investigating the source of the calamities and hostilities, uncovering malevolent forces veiled in the dark, and ultimately saving all the Sky Realm from devastation. Welcome to Granblue Fantasy Relink. It is quite the understatement to say that this game has been heavily anticipated since it was first revealed almost a decade ago. Personally, I only jumped in around 2 years ago when I was casually perusing YouTube and stumbled upon a trailer of the game. And in that moment, it just clicked. And I started getting into Granblue Fantasy by watching the anime. No, you don't need to watch the anime to get to know the story, as it is standalone and it provides plenty of source material for those getting into the franchise for the very first time. After playing most of what Relink has to offer, I was not disappointed. So sit back, relax, and let's dive right in. Set after the events of the anime, the crew continues their journey in search of the end of the skies, Estalusia. As they were cruising on the airship, the Grand Cypher, hordes of monsters swarm the party, and in the aftermath, our protagonists, the captain and Lyria, get separated from the crew. Upon reuniting, the team begins to observe strange things occurring around them and the Zega Grande Skydome at large. With the help of newfound allies, the crew discovers a mysterious threat, the Church of Avia, an ominous faction that is after Lyria because of her ability to command the primal beasts. What is the Church of Avia? What are they trying to accomplish? Why are they after Lyria? All these and more will be revealed as the crew continue on their journey. Whether you are new or an avid fan of the Granblue Fantasy IP, the writing and story are wholesome and captivating as what I have come to expect from Cygames. While it is definitely not a tale that hasn't been told, it remains to be a compelling narrative about saving the world from peril. And just as compelling as the story are the eye-popping visuals. Right at the beginning of the game, one of the key components of the gorgeous graphics is the use of cel-shaded over photorealistic art styles. I have always been a proponent of cel-shaded art styles because it remains more timeless in comparison to games trying to push the limits of current tech. Because given how rapid technology evolves, photorealistic games become obsolete very quickly in comparison to the visual direction that games like Granblue Fantasy Relink take. Heck, to this day I still think Fire Emblem Three Houses, a game that came out in 2018 with similar cel-shaded visuals, still looks fantastic that rivals the graphical fidelity of many recent releases. That is not to say that other aspects of the graphics look terrible. In fact, it is quite the opposite. In Granblue Fantasy Relink, you'll be facing off against plenty, and I mean plenty of giant beasts, each with their own unique graphical spectacle. It is quite clear that Cygames spent an enormous amount of resources creating these set pieces that are oozing with attention to detail and beautiful textures and particle effects that again, I believe will stand the test of time. The same can be said with the diverse and vibrant locations of the game. Whether it is casually strolling around towns, traversing into dense forests rich with flora and fauna, ascending snowy mountains, trudging through lands of searing heat, and many more, Granblue Fantasy Relink offers no shortage of meticulously crafted locations that are neither too large nor too small. In the context of performance, not once did I feel the game lag or drop in frames. Everything was simply buttery smooth with no texture pop-ins or any other issues with next to non-existent load times on the PS5. Suffice to say that the visuals of Granblue Fantasy Relink will remain spectacular for years or even decades to come. With a captivating story and stunning visuals, what about the sound design of Granblue Fantasy Relink? Well, I am pleased to say that the audio also did not disappoint. Clearly, Cygames were betting big on this game being a commercial success. Being a fan of the Granblue Fantasy franchise since I got into the anime, I could not help but to experience the storytelling and the cast of characters I have come to love in the most authentic way I could. And with that, of course, I mean I used the Japanese voice acting, which to no surprise remains excellent and pays homage to its anime roots. In my entire playthrough, not once did I feel that any of the voiceovers were off or lacking, and each of the characters in the game were given quality VA that are spot on with their character.
全員無事のようだな。助かったぜ、おいげん。
ところでルリア、さっきのバハムートだが、もう大丈夫なのか？
大丈夫みたい。原因は何だったんだ？私にも分かりません。ねえ、ここで考えてても仕方ないわ。一旦グランサイファーに戻らない？だな。また魔物が出ないうちに帰ろうぜ。
待ってちょうだい。この道の先、遠くない距離に町があるみたいなの。まずはそこでこの空域について情報を得てみるのはどうかしら。
No expense was spared in the sound effects and OSTs. Whether during emotional moments in the story, a powerful attack from your party or your foes, or the numerous adrenaline-raising music of the boss battles, the sound design of Granblue Fantasy Relink was given just as much attention as the other components of the game.
どうするみたいな。これはどう？
即断さん、はいと。ルリアは私が守る。
シンクのバ
必ず助けるからね。ラカン。
一筋縄ではいかないようだ。
So far, I have discussed the story, graphics, and audio of Granblue Fantasy Relink and why they are great. But the undeniable truth is where games shine is its gameplay. At the end of the day, games are defined by how fun they play, and everything else is just icing on the cake. And the best way to describe Granblue Fantasy Relink's gameplay is that it is an action RPG akin to Capcom's Monster Hunter games, but with training wheels. And I mean that in the most positive way, as the Monster Hunter games are notorious for having high barriers of entry in the context of difficulty for many, and myself included. In fact, if you want to get into the Monster Hunter games but find them too difficult, I would go as far as to say that Granblue Fantasy Relink is a great place to start. In Granblue Fantasy Relink, you set out in the field with a party of 4 characters. Whether in single or multiplayer, I did not try the latter as I believe it does not change the core experience significantly. In the beginning, you start off with the household characters, namely Gran or Jita, depending on your preference, but also interchangeable throughout your playthrough, as they both have the exact fighting style, stats, and techniques. You also get Catalina, Rackham, Io, Eugen, and Rosetta at the start, and all of them have vastly different playstyles and are incredibly fun to play, which is rare for me. Because when it comes to action RPGs, I have a tendency to dislike playing particular characters, as I simply do not like how they play, the feel, or technique of how to play a certain character. But for Granblue Fantasy Relink, I absolutely had a blast playing each and every one of the characters. So good job on that, Cygames. Not long after the early chapters, you will have access to unlock more characters to join your crew, depending on how many and how well you perform the numerous side quests of the game. For completionists who wish to be optimal in maxing out characters, I recommend beginning recruiting these additional characters once you have fully completed the main story, as recruiting them at this point will have them all the way up to level 60, that saves time having to level them up to that point yourself. The caveat to this tactic though is completing the story, especially the final chapter, requires heavy grinding and completing many quests. So if there's a character that you really want to play, then I suggest you get them as soon as possible. Again, this tactic is for optimal players who want to max out their entire party. Granblue Fantasy Relink's progression system is heavily numbers driven, meaning the entirety of the game loop is chasing after bigger numbers, whether it is through increasing your crew's level or forging and enhancing new weapons and gear. Once you attain your desired level and equipment, your next objective is to level up even further and gather items and materials, increasing your character's stats even more. So if you are an RNG-driven player, Granblue Fantasy Relink will make you feel right at home. Upon leveling your characters and completing quests in the quest counter, you will receive mastery points or MSP, which you can use to unlock stat boosts and new abilities for your characters in their respective skill trees. Each character has a linear skill tree that will take plenty of grinding to fully accomplish. On top of this, each character has 3 categories of skill trees for you to master, namely offense, which increases the character's potency to inflict damage on enemies, defense, which increases their capability to receive damage and resist status effects, and collection, which is simply unlocking stat boosts from the weapon they are equipping. Increasing stats and unlocking new abilities requires you to invest MSP on these trees. But the distinction I like to make for Granblue Fantasy Relink is that it does not force you to play particular characters if you want to progress in their skill trees, and that is because MSP is pooled and shared for the entire party. I believe this is important to highlight, as it gives emphasis on you simply using your favorite characters to progress in everyone's skill trees, instead of players being forced to use a character they do not wish to use simply to max out their stats. But like I said earlier, each character is fun to play, but I greatly appreciate Cygames making this an option for players who prefer to play particular characters. I hope that more developers adapt the system more in their games in the future. In terms of the other methods to further strengthen your characters, these can be performed when you are in a town or hub. Here, you can take on side quests from people around town, which usually entails taking down particular foes or obtaining materials. In return, these quest givers provide you with rewards such as money and useful items that you can use to enhance your equipment. Speaking of enhancing your equipment, there's also the blacksmith who can enhance your existing weapons and also sell you new ones, provided that you have the needed materials to do so. Enhancing weapons, once again, is done in 3 ways. First is to simply provide materials to level up your weapon until you reach the level cap. Secondly, upon reaching the level cap limit, you will need to invest more materials to set the level cap limit even higher so that your weapon can then level up further, increasing its attributes. The max level for each weapon for each character is level 150. Finally, the blacksmith can also imbue weapons, giving it additional perks and stat boosts, again provided you have the materials and quantities for said materials. So I was not kidding when I said Granblue Fantasy Relink is an RNG intensive game. There are also accessories that you can equip to your characters called sigils, which provide passive stat boosts such as increasing damage, health, crit rate, and so on. These can be enhanced or be exchanged for higher ranking sigils at the blacksmith and shop. To make the process not so tedious, the hub also provides a shop where you can exchange items and tokens you have obtained in your journey for useful crafting materials to enhance your weapons and sigils. The shop even has powerful sigils that you can trade with, provided you have the required materials. You can also partake in ranked quests in the quest counter, which is where you will spend most of your time in the game. In the quest counter, as the name implies, you can participate in numerous quests taking down beasts. To make it more interesting, these quests are ranked depending on how you perform and whether or not you have accomplished some or all of the optional conditions. These conditions range from taking down waves of monsters or the boss in X amount of minutes and use items found in the stages to defeat opponents. Each quest ends with you receiving a grade between C to S++, depending on your performance and how much of the optional conditions you have achieved. The higher the rank you obtain per quest, the better rewards you receive. You are always free to try out quests again as many times as you wish, as the difficulty of these quests range from easy, normal, hard, very hard, extreme, maniac, and proud, with the latter difficulties only becoming available as you progress or complete the main story. Suffice to say, it is beginner friendly, as you can always go back to previous quests you have completed to get the highest rank when your party has become stronger, while also appealing to hardcore players who wish to complete all the quests at S++ rank that requires the very best gear and maxing out your party. Last but not least, the quest counter is also where you can get to know your crew through the Fate episodes. The Fate episodes are narration of the backstories of each member of your team, featuring static images and full voiceovers. Some of the chapters in the Fate episodes are narrated in the form of quests that highlight the character's story arc. I highly recommend completing these Fate episodes, as doing so will increase the stats of said characters. In case you missed it, Granblue Fantasy Relink is a very numbers-driven game. Though that may turn some of you off, It is also very friendly towards casuals, so friendly that in the options menu, you can make the game basically play itself for you. While definitely an optional feature and turned off by default, I am glad that Cygames took into consideration gamers who just want to play the game casually or simply experience the story. So hardcore players, fear not, it is just an optional feature. With all that out of the way, let's jump right into the combat. As I mentioned earlier, the combat features a party of 4 where you mostly participate in taking on epic boss battles. While not having to be as methodical as taking down foes in Monster Hunter, players do need to be careful when these bosses perform their signature attacks, as it can easily incapacitate you if you are not careful. Like many action RPGs, precision in striking, parrying, and dodging is key to victory. The game also encourages you to work together as a team and properly time your strikes. This will enable you to take down your foes much more efficiently and yield greater rewards in quests. By coordinating with your allies, you will be able to unleash devastating attacks, such as staying true to the game's title, Link Attacks. Link Attacks can be executed upon filling a blue stun gauge, which can be found on top of every foe, which is performed by successfully and consistently landing blows alongside your allies. Consecutively performing Link Attacks will increase your Link gauge up to 100%, which upon reaching it will give you access to execute Link Time. Link Time is the state where all foes move in very slow motion, and the entire party has massive stat boosts, giving you a large window to perform massive damage on all your opponents. Finally, there are the Skybound Arts and the Chain Burst. Skybound Arts are powerful finishing moves that each character has possession to and is able to execute them upon reaching 100% of their SBA gauge, located below the health gauge. While your allies can perform these Skybound Arts themselves, I strongly recommend setting them to use it only at your command, as again, proper coordination with your team can make Skybound Arts more effective. This is how I recommend you utilize the Skybound Arts. The best time to use them is when one member of the party reaches 100% SBA gauge, a second member has 90%, the third having 80%, and the final member having 70%. This is because when one party member uses his or her Skybound Art, the remaining party members will receive an increase in their SBA gauge by 10%. So with that, the entire party will be able to use their Skybound Arts consecutively, leading to an additional powerful attack called the Chain Burst, an additional coordinated attack by the party dealing devastating damage to your foes. Do keep in mind though that the party needs to be in close proximity to one another to successfully execute the Chain Burst at its best.
まだチャンスね癒しの顔を見せ
これで決める絶対に負けないターンテンペストブレードカタリナさん
君に続こうせめて奴らとに近くに
オイラ敵じゃねえぜ
よせった
分かってるわダンディロー
決めるバーストゲール
And that about wraps up why I think Granblue Fantasy Relink is amazing. The story, while not innovative, is a compelling one in its own right that appeals to newcomers and veterans alike. The cel-shaded art style and visuals look stunning that will ensure that it will remain a classic for a very long time. The voice acting is impressive and remains faithful to the source material, while the soundtracks are absolute bangers for the entirety of the game. The gameplay is rich with content that will keep players coming back and is designed for casual and hardcore players. Cygames have done a phenomenal job, and I certainly believe that the almost 10 years worth of waiting time is absolutely worth it. And I, for one, can't wait to see where the Granblue IP goes next. Granblue Fantasy Relink is definitely worth the full asking price, regardless of your platform of choice. And that concludes this video. If you're still here, thank you for watching, and do consider subscribing if you have not already for more JRPG content. Happy JRPG gaming, and I will see you in the next video. Take care, everyone.
空の果てが近づくのは嬉しいですけど、こうしてずっと旅を続けるのもいいなって思うんです。私、みんなと一緒の空の旅が楽しくて、いつまでもこうして旅を続けられたらって。そうだな。